Have your attention, please. The show starts in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
Salaam Alaikum. Mr. Moderator, our distinguished guests, brothers and sisters, our friends and our enemies.
Bismillah, wa salatu wa salam, Rasulullah, wa ba'd. In the name of Allah, and may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon His last and final messenger. As to what follows, family, friends, foes, haters, and hateettes, welcome back to the Feachaz. I greet you all in peace and love and no hatred in my heart. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So before we begin, please like, please subscribe, and please share. As you know, we got a lot of haters up in here. And today, alhamdulillah, we got a very, very, very special guest. Hayakumullah, we got Imam Yusuf Rios. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Sheikh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
How are things?
Alhamdulillah. I think we're a little more on the sunshine side compared to what I hear is going on in the Midwest and maybe up there with the snow up north.
100%, man. We got snow out here. We got like cold weather. I was actually sick for a while. I had the flu. That's why I kind of like stayed off of YouTube for a while because I was really, really, really sick, like really sick, right? But alhamdulillah, you know, we are back. We are back like crack, as they say.
Alhamdulillah. It seems to be going around. I was reflecting on the ayah of the Quran, تِلْكَ أَيَّامُ نُدَوِّلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. Those are the days that everyone gets their share of them. Referring to hardship and ease and that type of thing within the dunya. And usually it's referred to like communities and nations. But I was thinking about how this whole sickness thing is going around, and it seems to be everyone is getting their share of it in one way or another. There's definitely the post-COVID time period. There's definitely a new reality with that. May Allah protect us.
100%, 100%. Yeah. So today's topic, we titled it the EQ versus IQ, or emotional quotient versus intelligent quotient, right? And mastering emotional intelligence. And I came across, actually, you sent me this live that you did, right? Regarding the emotional intelligence with reference to the prophetic model. And I had watched this live, and this was it was truly an amazing topic, right? So before we get into it, if you can just describe very quickly for the audience what emotional intelligence is, as opposed to like your IQ or intelligent quotient, and why it is important.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. As mentioned on the live, in brief, we can say that emotional intelligence is a concept that was developed within European American thought. Daniel Coleman became famous for it. He wrote the book Emotional Intelligence, but he wasn't the founder of it. He kind of picked up on it from some articles that were being used, and it became a way to measure people's interpersonal capacities and skills. And their capacity to deal with life situations. Of course, it's used in leadership development. The business sector kind of uses this, and then it overflows into other sectors of society and community. Became popular, in like social work and education and other areas. So the idea is to kind of to measure where a person is at with their ability to navigate emotion, and how in tune are they with themselves, and their ability to work through emotions. That's kind of the gist of it. right? So it's a play off the IQ concept, but dealing with feeling, feeling and emotion, that type of idea.
Excellent. And you had mentioned some very pertinent points in the live that you did. That emotional intelligence is paramount, essentially, with regarding interpersonal relationships with others, right? And navigating through how you interact with other people, right? So, if you could just elaborate on that a little bit.
There's a lot of different ways of coming about that. Actually, when we started coming on together, preparing for the actual live here on the features, Allah
Hmm.
bless the effort. A number of different things came to mind. Uh, we know that IQ was justified in social stratification. It was a means to justify social stratification, and it became also within the system itself a way to justify where people are placed and how we look at people and their levels of intelligence.
I.e.,
But the
white
same,
supremacy.
yes,
Yes.
that's the bottom line. I mean
Mm,
that's the bottom line in that regard.
mm,
And so the you had the idea of the bell curve
yep.
and other tools, analytical tools that were used in certain frames
Mm,
to lock people into certain boxes, and then comes the social punishments. You don't have access to this, you don't have access to that.
mm,
So the same thing, to be honest with you, we need to talk about emotional intelligence within the framework of systemic injustice and what that means in reality versus just talking about emotion kind of in this context that's separate from the struggles of everyday life, so to speak. So,
mm,
firstly, at a basic level, we all know that dealing with each other emotionally is not that easy,
yes.
and we have different levels of sensitivity to we can say the whole idea of vibrations. I'm
Mm,
picking up on this type of vibe, that type of vibe, and we know also that emotion is something that's punished. If you get too emotional, people tell you, why are you getting emotional in a
mm,
conversation? Or if you begin to express yourself, firstly, emotionally, towards some sort of injustice, and you begin to speak out and share your emotion, and that energy comes. Firstly, basically, you're being contained at the voice, like lower your voice, and then the idea becomes like, well, you're not allowed to express anger or whatever it may be. So we
mm,
have to know that, emotion, yes, to simplify the process, is essential in our interpersonal relationships with one another. Is essential in our interpersonal relationships with one another. Is the way we connect. But we
mm,
also have to have an understanding that we also live in a society which certain emotions are not allowed to be expressed, and we live in a society within the white supremacist framework, the idea of reason being superior to everything,
mm,
right? It also becomes a ruler for other aspects of human life. So emotion gets downplayed as though it doesn't really have a role. Although the irony of that is that emotion is the foundation of art and its various expressions. Whether
mm.
it's we talk about music,
And
you know,
creativity.
and the whole thing of creativity and so on and so forth. And
Mm,
you just think about the idea of how in this society the humanities, specifically the arts, how an opera will be funded, but it's an expression of elitist culture. So
mm,
emotion is allowed to be expressed in that realm, in a highly controlled realm. But then look at what happens on the popular level when we start talking about, for instance, the entertainment industry outside of so-called those formats, that type of European American format of what is considered culture. When we start talking about what is considered popular culture, the music realm, where intuition and creativity and emotion comes in, is highly controlled,
yes.
highly
100%.
controlled, highly
Mm,
controlled. So the ability, and we know that that type of understanding, the intelligence that comes along with emotion and so on and so forth, being in tune with it, it leads to all kind of creativity. But when it's not properly handled, it leads to chaos as well. We know that people can
100%.
plunge
Yeah.
plunge into drugs, or they plunge into anger in excess, or there's an issue where people plunge into depression because of the emotions not being in balance. But at the same time, society controls how we express emotion, what type of emotions is allowed to be in the public realm. But we know people of non European backgrounds, emotion is central.
Mm.
And so that's why a lot of times what we find is that our concept of emotional intelligence, we struggle with it. Why? Because our emotions are telling us something wrong
Yes.
in the world, something wrong in the way that things function.
Mm.
There's either a lack of recognition, or there's we can feel hatred, we can feel unappreciated, we can feel the dehumanization. You know what I'm saying? And so, but at the same time, in that midst, we overcome that and we utilize art, and we use that same emotion to kind of resist. But in both ways, you find that there's some sort of clash with the system.
Yeah.
One way is very controlled, and then there's wealth extraction. Money is made, from the entertainment industry,
Hmm.
especially music and so on and so forth, which before was therapeutic
Hmm.
for people, indigenous people. It was where the resistance took place. That it was emotion controlled but understood within the tribe. And that became controlled. And then we find that our frustration of understanding what's going on with the conditions of our existence is also controlled, right? So the emotional realm, even the idea of measuring the emotional intelligence, it's a very European American idea,
Yeah.
right?
Now,
Very European
I
American.
want to bring it back to something that you had said, that in the Eurocentric type of worldview, where they value logic over emotion. However, there has been, for a better part, at least a century, at least since the advent of psychological sciences and whatnot, to exploit the emotions of people in order to
Yes,
elicit certain behaviors, right?
yes,
And there are even books written about this, like The Crowd by Bouyesi, right? There are certain, political philosophical books, and even if you read books about debate and
yes.
argumentation, they never advise you to go into the logic of the argument. They always try to tell you, when you're debating somebody, you should try to elicit the emotion of the crowd, right? Because you're trying to win a debate. You get me? You're trying to win over the crowd, not necessarily convince your opponent, right? If you're trying to convince your opponent, then you're going to have a logical argument. But if you're in a public forum, in our public debate, what you want to do is win over the crowd, and the way you do that is to elicit emotional responses from that particular crowd, right? So this type of psychological aspect of emotional intelligence has always been a type of you could say, like a psychological aikido class against the darker skinned people of the earth, where their emotions are, and the momentum of their emotions are used against them to elicit certain behaviors, like you mentioned about music and things of this nature, right? So how is it that us folks who have been colonized or whatnot, what are some of the tips that we can recognize when we're being exploited emotionally, and what are some of the advices, particularly from the Prophet Muhammad SAW, where he explicitly said in very clear terms how to act when you're uh, feeling emotional? If you can get into that.
I think, firstly, that the idea, when we go back to Greek thinking, which is kind of in this society is held to be at a peak level.
Mm,
The Greek model is held to be, even though what we call Europeans, they're not necessarily from the Mediterranean uh, culture of what is considered Greek culture.
mm,
And we have this argument that the Greeks borrowed heavily from Africa. That's a
Yeah,
solid. That's a solid argument. They kind of
yeah. The
flipped a lot
ancient
of African
Egyptians
cultures.
and yeah, yeah.
Yes, and they took it in a different direction. When you go to that type of model,
Hmm.
Plato was, and especially when you start talking about the Republic, was very adamant at controlling two things he was against. Was he was against demagoguery, which is appealing to the emotions of the people for political aims,
Hmm.
and we can even add sophistry, which is
Hmm.
high flown arguments to convince and persuade people emotionally, even though there's no truth value in it. And then the other issue was the shu'ara, or the poets.
Hmm.
The poets were controlled in the society because the poets can spark a riot
Yeah, exactly.
because they
Yeah.
can move the people. So you find that the Greeks, they laid that foundation for what we begin to see in Anglo-Saxon society, where emotion is very tightly controlled, and there's almost like this mathematical reason and so on and so forth that comes into the play.
Hmm.
But they did have a better framework of analyzing certain things, like the idea that there's something called pathos, which is emotional appeal and so on and so forth, and dealing at the emotional level. Ethos, which is dealing with the concept of right and wrong and ethics, and logos, which is dealing with the reason.
Hmm.
Now, the African American philosopher thinker, Dr. Mulifikiti Asante, the Afrocentric concept, he brings up how uh, African thought combined all of these realities.
Hmm.
You
Yep.
speak at the level of emotion, the level of ethics, at the level of logic, right? You address the whole of the human, and then you're going at the spiritual level.
Hmm.
But that type of discourse is tightly controlled.
Hmm.
So what happens is that we begin to parse out, we begin to see the discourse split into specialized elements, like what you said. So you have just one realm that deals with ethics,
Yeah.
separate from empathy and emotion,
Hmm.
right? Because, like, for instance, if you look at the Palestinian situation now, if you go with empathy, if you start getting into the emotional side, you're definitely going to get to the ethical side really fast because you're going to
Really quick. Yeah.
identify with them. And so
Exactly.
that's why dehumanization is always that. Don't
Hmm.
empathize with
Hmm.
people, certain groups that have been dehumanized. Don't empathize with them because then you'll recognize their humanity, and then that'll force you into an ethical position,
Hmm.
right? Which can challenge your logic. Which
Hmm.
can challenge your logic. That was the strategy of Martin Luther King, right? The idea was, let them beat you down and see your pain so that they can empathize with your suffering. Then maybe their logic of racism or social justice may change, that type of thing. Appeal to their emotion so that you can get to an ethical side somewhere along the line.
Hmm.
So we have two ideas here. We have the idea of addressing the whole of the human being, which means we're addressing all of these angles. Now, when it comes to us understanding liberation, we have to be clear on all of those angles.
Yeah.
And we have to be clear that there's times where certain emotions we operate out of them, certain emotions more than others, right? We may operate out of certain emotions more than
More
others,
than others. Yeah.
right? So we may call it normality to be down on a regular basis, but
Hmm.
that being down is a natural response to some of the social conditions that we're in. Not
Hmm.
everybody's in the same condition. Not everybody's operating from the same emotions. But if you're in a certain neighborhood and you're deprived of certain things, necessities of life, and you're seeing people self-medicate if you go to Philadelphia, you go down to certain areas in North Philly, you're just going to see loads of people on heroin.
100%. They have a lot of videos now
Yes.
on all over social media about the living dead, and people getting strung out on this new drug. It's called Trank or something like that, right? Where it's a mixture of tranquilizers and heroin-based drugs, and you can see them. They're like sleeping, standing up, and they're getting all kinds of physical medical conditions along with the mental medical conditions. But yeah, yes, Yes. So, but yeah, continue, Sheikh. Go ahead.
No. I mean that is
Mhm,
good to paint the scenario.
mhm,
So to make it easy in that
mhm,
type of environment, when you're looking at that type of stuff and you're living in that reality, there's a certain emotional state that you're going to stay in at a regular on the regular level on a
mhm.
regular basis, right? Or what you call a regular level, but is in reality it's your response to those set of conditions, but it's not a normal
Exactly.
state, right?
Exactly. Those type of drugs that that we were just talking about, where you mentioned about Philly, and we have the same, actually, very similar situation going on here in Canada, believe it or not, right? In places like the southern part of Canada, like St. Catharines, in Toronto now, in BC, all the way in the West Coast, where we're seeing very similar conditions, right? It's comparable to what's going on in Philadelphia, but the the opioid epidemic, what opioid does, because we're talking about emotional intelligence, what that does is it makes the person feel numb, right? It makes the people feel devoid of all feeling, right? They can you basically don't feel anything. And that is the type of feeling that's what they're trying to get from these drugs, to make them forget all about their problems or their troubles or whatever, so they don't feel any emotion whatsoever, right? So, and the reason why they want to get that is because, as you mentioned, if you are put in situations where your environment is forcing you into these directions, then that eventually is going to happen, right? So, but
Right.
yeah.
And so that's the side of the person that self medicates. I was
Yes.
indicating to the side of you living in that environment, right? And how you would feel watching people self destruct.
Mm,
You understand what I'm saying? You know what's a good sign of emotional intelligence, man? This comes to mind as we freestyle a little bit.
mm,
It may not be a completely accurate uh, rendition or narrative,
mm,
but the movie Harriet Tubman,
mm,
demonstration of emotional and spiritual intelligence,
mm,
right? And she's in the process of attempting to get others to become conscious
mm,
of their actual physical social state and their emotional state. And she's struggling not only with social conditions of oppression, but she's also attempting to reach people so that they can emotionally respond properly
mm.
to those conditions.
Yes, yes. And it's very important that you mentioned that, because I mentioned before that even the Prophet Muhammad says something, what we now call emotional intelligence, is something that was a very important and integral part of his dawah, right? He used to advise his Sahaba, for example, not to get angry. And what he means by not get angry, because we're all going to get angry. Even the Prophet said something, he got angry. But what he means by do not get angry is that at the time of your anger, do not act upon that anger, because anger is a hot emotion, right? It will cause destruction if you act upon your anger at the time of your anger, right? So, and also things such as the loving and the hating for the sake of Allah, right? So
Right.
we love and we hate, right? But our love and our hate should be directed and focused in certain directions, because when your love and your hate is let loose and uncontrolled and unrefined, then you will find yourself in precarious situations, and even being on the completely wrong side of history, because you hated for the wrong thing and you loved for the wrong thing, right? So go ahead, Imam. I just
No,
wanted
no,
to,
no, no. It's,
yeah.
it's good to tie it back.
Mm,
We're trying to use the examples of
mm,
where we're at and then connect it to
mm,
how it is that Dean can guide us. But we have examples
mm,
where we see people transforming the emotional state. Malcolm went through a lot of different phases in this
mm.
regard.
Yeah.
There were stages of development in that. And
Mm,
so it's like when you start talking about the ideal of oppression, you have to recognize that there's stages of firstly unawareness
mm,
until you become into a state of what we call consciousness. You know what I'm saying? Which would be realizing your social conditions, your interpersonal relationships, and then how you respond internally to that. Then the question comes, how is it that Dean guides us, right, in this regard? But we a lot of times we're not going to get to a solid practice of Deen if we're not recognizing how it is that we're interacting emotionally to our states and our conditions. You can have family trauma, intergenerational trauma. You can
Yes.
have the social conditions. All of that is operational at the same time. So then the question becomes, how do we apply the sunnah to that? That's kind of where you were going, right? But before we
Yes.
can talk about applying the sunnah to that, we have to do some work with ourselves
With ourselves, yeah.
as a community and as individuals. And that's part of the struggle of understanding the emotional intelligence side and how it relates to liberation is that there's certain a lot of times we don't allow ourselves certain emotions. We don't allow certain emotions because we're so used to the struggle. We're staying in a certain state of mind. You know what I'm saying? And that certain state of mind, especially when you start talking about things like trauma, is keeping us at one level emotionally,
Well,
and even and is
that's a
even
part of the
reflect.
that's a part of the maturity that we have to develop, right?
Yes, yes,
Because particularly with traumatized people, their emotions are always at extremes. They're
yes,
you understand,
yes.
and because their emotions are extremes, they're very easily manipulated and taken advantage of, right? So one of the best advices, as we mentioned before, is what the Prophet ﷺ, he said, do not get angry, not meaning don't get angry, but do not act on that anger at the time of that anger, because anger is a very important emotion. It's a measuring stick to what you recognize as right and what is wrong. You understand? So now we see the thing that's going on in Palestine, for example, right? And we've seen this type of thing happen before in the past, before the advent of social media, and we've seen how Western powers manipulated the emotions of Muslims in order to elicit certain reactions en masse, like what we saw with the Arab Spring, like what we saw with you know basically these type of nation building tactics they use in Afghanistan and Iraq and these type of things, right? So if your emotions now are, as we mentioned, are running wild, right? And you're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to be angry, but the anger, if your anger is being basically being pulled by the strings of people who have do not have your best interests at heart, then that is a massive problem, which was where emotional intelligence comes into play. So go ahead, Sheikh. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, 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 no. We're having a free flowing conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
It goes both ways because the angle can be internalized,
Mm.
and people can become depressed,
Yes,
and
absolutely.
they can feel helpless. I've
Mm.
heard that from a lot of Muslims in this time
Mm.
period, that they
Yeah.
feel helpless, what to
Mm.
do, this, that, or it can get out of hand,
Mhm.
and then even project it. Where we start. Sometimes what happens with oppressed people is they oppress other people.
Yes. Yeah.
Where they become violent towards each other and so on. So that's why, for instance, one of the top thinkers in this regard,
Mm.
who has been marginalized in the Muslim community and in the general community, is Dr. Amos Wilson. He's not Muslim.
Boy.
Dr. Amos Wilson, he talked about things like black on black violence. How
Mm.
is that to be understood in the
Mm.
context of the system and so on and so forth? There's a lot of people say, well, they're killing each other, but they don't understand neither the emotional processes at work nor the systemic processes at work.
Mm.
And that's why we say before we can start to apply the deen properly, we have to be in touch with what's going on with ourselves and why it is that we have arrived at certain
At this
emotional
point.
states.
Mm.
You go to some places on the East Coast, nobody's smiling.
Mm. Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? You
Yep.
don't
Yep.
smile.
Yep.
And you look at some of the Puerto Rican community. It's like everybody back in the day, especially you take a picture.
Mm.
We have frown. You know what I'm saying? You
Mm.
have to show your hardness.
Very
It's
hard. You
not
have to be
you.
hard. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You have to show your hardness, and the same thing when we talk about. That's how a lot of this whole debate on toxic masculinity came about. And one of the ones, and unfortunately, not there was some people don't like to access knowledge because they think that knowledge is only by personality or someone agreeing with you. But in Visions for Black Men, Dr. Naeem Akbar
Oh yeah.
began to talk about manhood in these different stages of how it was developed. You know what I'm saying? And so emotion a lot of times is like, for instance, when you look at the hadith, none of you truly believes until you love for your brother what you love for yourself. When we start talking about brotherhood, the Quran talks to us about the concept of brotherhood, and so does
Yeah.
the Sunnah clarifies on some angles. So how can brotherhood exist if the idea of recognizing the other person is not there yet for us? I don't recognize you 100%.
100%.
As a matter of
Yeah.
fact, I hate you. And I don't
Yeah.
know what love is 100% because I hate myself. So when you put the veneer of sunnah on that, that's translated into I'm going to hate you with a bismillah in front of it. So I may not salam you, right? Because I don't recognize you. You understand what I'm saying? I may not come to your aid, right? Because it's not within my interest. There's a lot of imbalances that come in this regard that we have to realize. Like, there's certain emotions we have to unpack them. We have to unpack these emotions. Sometimes, the whole idea that's raised to the fore a lot of times, and it has to do with the mothers that are single mothers, that they cultivate young boys, and the emotions that come from that. Just think about that scenario: single mothers in large number cultivating young boys that end up becoming men or don't become men totally, right?
Yes. They're arrested in their development.
Arrested development, like you have. Okay, so a lot of times we can't unpack that. We're not allowed to unpack that. Is immediately, we're not allowed to talk about the whole phenomenon of single mothers in a way to challenge that dynamic. I'm not talking about to say that she should get married. I'm just saying the idea that we can, is that single mother doing a sound job in raising her young son? She's almost sacred to the point where you're not allowed to question, especially in this
Yeah.
environment that we live in now.
Yep.
But
Yep.
but we can talk about young boys not expressing their emotions and then putting that young boy in the framework where he has to operate according to a standard of emotion, right? That maybe, like they say, well, women express themselves emotionally. Yeah. So now there's this standard where why aren't you using this standard? And so this becomes the standard for what's considered to be the norm. That you should express your emotion, but there's so much signaling that's done, so much grooming that's done for the boy not to express the emotion properly, to hold
Exactly.
back
And
the
this right
emotion.
here is an
And
amazing point that you mentioned too, because this whole concept of motherhood, particularly in the Black community, this is a social engineering experiment, and we're seeing the tail end of it in 2023, where the after so many generations of single motherhood, we're seeing through the art, through the music, through the media, through social media, what it's producing, right? So with the men now, if you do not have male mentorship or male, just male influence, like amongst the men, what you get is a type of fraternity culture within the community of other people growing up in that environment, like i.e. gang culture, i.e. Hip hop culture, right? Now it moves from community to a fraternity, like, you know what I mean? Expressing ideas through pop culture and these type of things, right? And this uh, through the expressing the ideas of pop culture, anybody can insert any idea that they want into the culture if they can monetize it. It's happened with hip hop already. It's happened. It's beginning to happen with R&B on a larger scale. It's happened with BET, for example. BET is not owned by black people, and everything coming out of BET is essentially used to illicit behaviors that are against what black people are actually supposed to be doing, right? So anyways, go ahead, Sheikh, go ahead.
No, I mean that's a reality that the culture itself.
Mm,
There's been a radical change in culture.
yes.
And by the way, this idea of single mother phenomena, this is
Mm,
global
mm,
across cultures.
mm,
And in many ways, the African American community has more experience at dealing with that than other communities.
mm,
You know what I'm saying at this point in time.
mm,
But it's a global phenomenon. You're seeing it across cultures now. And so the reality of the situation is that when you look at the culture itself, the culture is not supportive of healthy emotional development for anyone anymore.
mm,
You understand? We can't just single out one group right now. Before
mm,
you can single out one group and you say, well, this is, these other communities are totally benefiting and this one is exploited.
mm,
You have the problem of systemic injustice, but you also have the problem of the deterioration of society as a whole. And you find the implosion, there's the implosion of civilization
mm.
and the corrosive nature of culture. So everybody, because of globalization, is beginning to feel the impact, but everybody is not in the same place in the system. But the
Mm.
culture itself is giving a similar experience. That's why you find suicide rate is across the board.
Yep. For the
You know what I'm
first
saying?
time, I'm glad you mentioned that.
Drugs,
Yep, for the
drugs is
first
across
time.
the board.
Yep,
Mental health
yep,
is across the board. But
yep.
what's sparking off these issues is not necessarily the same causes. You know what
Exactly.
I'm saying? There's a shared at times set of causes, and then there's unique causes to these issues. That the
Mm,
danger with this is that when you start talking about the issue of justice and liberation, what happens is that now the justice claims of specific communities can be thrown to the side because they say, well, it's all impacting all of us.
mm,
So when you go to a place like Philadelphia, the reason why, you know, uh, Jenny from the suburbs is from an Irish background is on heroin is not
mm,
exactly the same reason why Jose from North Philadelphia is an addict or Tyrone from down the block.
mm.
It's not, but they're all in the same,
Both.
heroin dope circle. You
Yeah.
understand what I'm saying? And they're all in that same, they're all being hit by the same social phenomena. You know what
Mm.
I'm saying? That it could have, Jose could have started from, he was in a car accident. He was with his boys, smoking weed or
Yep.
whatever. Got hit. Then he ends in the hospital. Then they give him the prescription. But
And it's game over. Game
it's
over
game
from
over.
there.
But his set of conditions are not the same as the girl that's coming from the suburbs.
Mm,
So the thing about it is like we're being a little creative with our thinking. The thing about it is that we want to not just talk about emotion and
mm,
emotional intelligence. We also want to talk about what that means for ourselves,
mm,
what that means in our situation, right? That's important to understand.
mm.
And then as Muslims, we want to talk about emotional intelligence, within the context of the prophetic example, because here the prophetic example is giving us a way to revive our humanity.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? Because the prophetic example, this is the importance of looking at the first generation,
Mm,
including the model of the prophet within the first generation, versus isolating the model of the prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, and then you're dealing with all these traditional societies. No, the first generation was dealing with dehumanizing conditions. There was
mm.
no concept of a universal Islamic culture that was dominating a whole area in the first generation. It was
Yes.
not a traditional culture where everybody, for the most part, is Muslim. No, you were dealing with challenging situations. So what you find in the prophetic example is you find encounters with the Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam, where he's invested in people. Like the
Yeah.
Prophet breaks certain norms, alayhi salatu wasalam.
Mm.
He's
Yep.
he's dealing with the so-called outcasts of society.
100%.
You know what I'm
100%.
saying?
Yep.
He's bringing rich and poor together
Yep.
and then forging bonds among them. and solving those conflictual emotions that they may have towards each other because of those, what we would call in today's terms, they were isolated by tribe and caste, that type of thing. And so he's breaking those bonds, coming back to the universal brotherhood of Islam and humanity. This is where Malcolm had that insight that Islam, rahmatullahi alayhi, maybe can address some of the issues that we're facing because of the brotherhood of humanity issue. How do we get to that point? So when we look at the prophetic example, you mentioned a couple hadith. You mentioned the one about anger. And then I mentioned the one about loving your brother as yourself.
Yes.
But when we look at the prophetic example from the angle of how he invested in people and they felt that they were important, and
Yes.
it was actual. You know what I'm saying? It was
Yes.
actual. It wasn't posture. They use this type of posturing in corporate America. Where you have a name tag, and then customer service rep pretends that they're interested in you. You know what I'm saying? There's a certain type of manipulation that takes place there. So the Prophet ﷺ was actually connecting with human beings, right, at a very intimate level. That's the beginning part to the revolution of emotion. There has to be a revolution in emotion. There has to be a transformation in emotion. Because emotion is not only tied to our personal well-being, but it's tied to our interpersonal well-being, and emotion also is tied to our spirituality. Emotion is also foundation for marital life
100%.
and the concept of love. And then that's where you have sexuality come in. Emotion is there in the from the angle of parent-child relationship, friendships. One of the things that I say is like, and this is a very controversial statement, is that individualism in this society and Western societies has led for us not to understand brotherhood and sisterhood or our relationship to the community. In Islam, we say to each other, and we're encouraging the Sunnah, and we have a certain feeling for each other. So I love you for the sake of Allah.
No.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
In
And
general,
that right there
culture,
builds so much brotherhood. Just
yeah,
by
it builds
saying that.
brotherhood. It builds brotherhood. But if you don't have the language, and if you don't have the pathway, the, the actions, that's what I mean by the pathway, they open you up to understand what friendship and brotherhood looks like, the duties of brotherhood, so to speak, what a healthy child-parent relationship looks like, what a healthy male-female relationship looks like. If you don't have the pathway and the language, then you open up the door to not knowing what love is. And that's why people, you find, they begin to confuse the desire for sex with love. Then it
Yeah,
becomes
because there is a difference between feelings and emotions. The carnal desires or whatnot are not necessarily emotion. Emotions kind of navigate they will navigate your behavior. But if you're ruled by your feelings, there is no navigation behind your behavior. You just act upon what feels good, like what basically what you call it stimulates your dopamine
right.
receptor.
Is
Right?
instinctual, is chemical.
Yeah.
And that's where, it's important for us to look at the reality, of what do we understand by being a human being in light of the Quran, and then in light of how this society has defined who a human being is and what is human behavior. And you have to realize this society has defined the human and the animal as being equivalent. You
Yes.
understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
And then the psychology is rooted in really eliciting animal behavior.
Yes.
You understand what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And then that's what feeds the economy, and
Mhm.
that's what feeds the political system. You know what I'm saying? When you have a bunch of people that don't have a complete understanding of being, or holistic understanding of being a human being, they're more susceptible to being arrested. They're more
Yeah.
susceptible to being exploited. They're more susceptible to having their desires tapped into.
Yep, and
but
yep, one
you
hundred
know
percent. Because they're
uh,
acting on instinct rather
yes,
than emotional intelligence, right?
right.
So we got the brother CL Edwards in the podcast. Sonic rahmatullahi wabarakatuh, brother.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
What you got for us, Sheikh?
Assalamu alaikum.
MashaAllah, I've just been enjoying the conversation. I just tuned in maybe about 15 minutes ago.
Mm,
SubhanAllah, Aki, for real, I didn't tune in when y'all first started broadcasting. I was, stopping at the store grabbing some groceries. But
mm,
mashallah, I was listening to the brothers' channel. I was
mm,
actually listening to the brothers' channel, and I was riding home from the grocery market. I was like, man,
mm.
we should get this brother on. We need to interview this brother. And then I come home and you interview him. I was listening to the latter ascent, Sheikh. I was really getting into that.
Mm.
Barakallahu feek.
Mashallah.
Mashallah. So what you got for Imam Yusuf Rios there, CL? What kind of questions you got for him?
I don't know if you guys touched on this or not,
Mm,
but I have a question. What should we? How should we analyze, and what possible solutions do we have for what's going on among the Muslims with the lack of pair bonding
ah,
and the number of divorces?
mm,
Yeah,
Isn't you
yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah,
mm,
And it's not just affecting the urban Muslim; it's
yeah,
affecting
yeah, yeah,
all across the board now.
mm.
yeah.
Excellent question.
That's why
Excellent.
we had mentioned that some
Mm,
of the that we mentioned when we brought up the single mother phenomena,
mm,
that in the past people would try to pin that solely on the black community,
mm,
and it was a way to kind of say that there's moral failings there, or it was an entry point to dehumanization on different levels. I think one of the ones that has been doing some solid work in that is Dr. Tommy Curry, who's
mm. Yeah, oh,
actually left. He left to Europe because of being threatened here and other conditions and so on and so forth. But I think that first we have to have a solid analysis of what's taking place
yeah. Mm,
generally, because like as you mentioned before, the phenomena of divorce was like placed on, it was like the mark of certain communities, and then then it was like people thought they were beyond being impacted,
mm,
Hmm.
right, by the conditions or society. They felt as though it's not going to happen to us or whatever.
mm,
So I think like firstly, as Muslims, we need to be interdisciplinary. The Timbuktu model was interdisciplinary.
mm.
That was the West African model of Islamic knowledge. It was interdisciplinary. You dealt with law, you dealt with
In many
art.
ways, it's still like that in parts of Mauritania, and it's still very much like that. But continue there, Imam Yusuf,
Right.
please. Mm,
And so we also have to have a political and social conscience, a historical conscience. Malcolm re-emphasized the importance of history.
mm,
And like I mentioned, Dr. Amos Wilson, in other words, you know, like Dr. Amos Wilson talks about things like how love is impacted. Our conception of love many times is impacted by how by the economy.
mm,
You know what I'm saying? We begin to we separate relationship problems from the economy and the
mm,
values in the economy. So the Muslims have fallen into being impacted on certain points, certain values,
mm,
and certain behaviors.
mm,
There's certain behaviors that we have taken on, there's certain values that we have taken on, which have opened the door to the destruction of the family.
mm,
And then there's certain conditions that impact from the outside that we don't have 100% control of, that create stress. But how we're responding to that stress, you understand, or how we're responding to the idea of my sense of who I am or my sense of dignity, it may be through behaviors that dehumanize or behaviors that break down the family. I don't know if I'm being clear or not on what I'm saying. That
mm,
we have to have a multi-tier system of analysis. We have to understand the social, we have to understand the political, we have to understand the economical, we have to understand the popular culture institution. Some people say, man, that's complicated. But yeah, if we want to
mm,
do work, we have to come at this systematically.
Yeah.
Then and so then the issue comes down to, I think indigenous people have a lot of experience, but the confidence is not always there collectively that we have tapped into, that we can tap into that experience and build knowledge that can help us reconstruct,
Mm.
because we have the experience of, like, a lot of Muslims now, a lot of Muslim families are going through drug addiction
Yep.
outside of the indigenous community.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yep.
You go to some places, you go to Minnesota, Somali community is dealing with gang issues.
Yep.
You
Even
can see
even
it. You can
even
see it
here
in
in
Chicago.
Toronto and
Yes,
Ottawa. Yep.
yes. You even go across the waters in the UK. You're dealing with a lot of social issues which were restricted to certain groups at
Mm.
one time. They've become part of the problem for the rest of the community. And those groups that were suffering those issues, they figured out how to work through those things.
Mm.
You understand what I'm saying? To some extent, but they don't, but there's not enough confidence in the experience to be able to build culture off of it and begin to reform ourselves. So
Mm.
the male female dynamic issue is one of the biggest problems now in the Muslim community across the board, as well
Mm.
as being single,
Mm.
as
Yep.
well as the challenge, the economic challenges that come along with marriage. You're seeing it
Mm.
across ethnic groups and everything like that.
Mm.
So we can't solve this issue without understanding our personal life histories, our family histories, our community histories and how it impacts. But also, we have to be careful how we're interpreting Islamic practice, because if we're just bringing in the idea of what was the base in traditional societies, we don't live
Mm.
in a traditional society.
100%.
The conditions of a traditional economy are not there. You
Yep.
understand what I'm saying? A political structure is not there. So what has happened to a lot of us is that we're trying to force a conception of marriage, say that it's Islamic, on our reality, and that's not it's not matching with our reality.
Mm.
You understand? And emotionally, we can be suffering. We can have a whole bunch of issues that we're going through. Economically, we can have some struggles. Even in our understanding of the deen, we may not be there at a certain level, but yet we're coming with this idea of marriage that's not
Yeah.
is clashing. So we
Yep.
have to sit down and really say, how does Islam address our situation? Don't give me what some scholars said 500 years ago. We need principles.
Yeah. We
This is
need.
fluid.
Yeah.
When we look at the
This right here,
Sahaba,
Imam
huh?
Yusuf, sorry to cut you off, but this right here, what you mentioned, is so important because what is happening is a lot of the immigrant Muslims, they're coming here with these ideas that they've had back in their own countries, right? So for them, Islam is something that they do culturally. It's not necessarily something that they do religiously, right? And they come over into the belly of the beast, and in many ways, the convert community is light years ahead of the convert community because we understand the culture here, right? And what the immigrant community is here for, they're not necessarily here for Islam, so to speak. You know, they're here basically escaping whatever's going on in their countries or whatnot, and they don't understand what is really going on here. So when you were mentioning before about what used to happen in the black community is now happening across the board. If you think about, for example, eugenics, right? How eugenics started. Eugenics was a plot and a ploy to call the numbers of who? Black community. But what is the call today in 2023 of the white supremacists? They are saying the Jews will not replace us. They are talking about great replacement theory. Why? Because of their own the things that their hands caused by themselves. Their people started taking their people started believing in the eugenicist programs that they was meant for darker skinned people. So they started getting abortions. They started taking birth control. They started saying, okay, smaller families, and and smaller families will make you rich, like what we've been teaching in Africa. Oh, the reason why you're poor is because you have too many kids and whatnot. They started believing that stuff. You understand? So now we have, for example, what the brother CL was saying about this type of almost like a gender war. right, happening between the male and the female, and these and marriages are no longer taking place like they used to, and families can't stay together, right? But who is at the forefront right now trying to deal with these issues? Which community is in the front and center?
African American communities.
Thank
Then
you.
we're the ones that
Thank,
are. We've been there having this discussion for over a decade now.
thank
Right.
you. And that's why I'm saying that we, in many ways, are light years ahead
They haven't
of what
even they haven't even begun to, or
these
I was going to
conversations.
bring up
Yes,
the little bit of
exactly. As
conversation
a matter
I've
of fact, brother CL, right? Don't mean to
mhm.
cut you up, but a matter of fact, what you see in modern times from the Utopian Da'i elites is that all they're doing is repeating red pill talking
That's what
points.
I was just about to say. That's
Go ahead.
exactly what I was just about to say. You
Go
read my
ahead.
mind. That's what they're telling. They're
Mhm.
the immigrant sisters are trying to go to university,
Mhm.
like all women. That's the
Yeah.
call to all women now. Going to university, getting higher degrees.
Yeah.
These corporations and companies are hiring women. I just saw a report today saying that women now out
Mhm.
earn men in the top metropolitan areas in America: New York, L.A.,
Right.
Atlanta, all these top areas. So now that's
Mhm.
affecting them, and they're telling, and
Yes.
some, it's a small voice, but it's a loud voice on YouTube, are telling them, just stay in the house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The sisters are not trying to hear that
And
call. Just stay in the house.
Yeah.
and there's also the sense of emasculation. You see it
Mhm.
in certain communities. You see it in certain ethnic communities
Mhm.
of people that immigrated here of late, recently. You
Mhm.
see
Mhm.
their children, a lot of young men feel emasculated, and that's why you find that they have inclined towards the conservative right wing camp
Mhm.
to try to recapture a sense of human dignity.
Mhm.
And see, the thing about it is that if you don't understand the system as a whole, we'll isolate it. Like we know, for instance, to get into some controversy, we know that the IDF trained
Mhm.
the police department in New York City, and then in other places, the same tactics were used, and these were the same tactics that ended up to people, indigenous people, being murdered at the
Mhm.
hands of police authority. You understand what I'm saying? So the same tactic is being used in a lot of ways. We know the colonial tactic, what we called the colonial tactic before, there's not too much difference between that and gentrification except levels of violence.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so we're seeing that the system is duplicated in itself in different ways.
Mhm.
They haven't become conscious of that. A particular large segment of the Muslim community has not become conscious of those processes. That's
Mhm.
why we're saying that we have to tap into our experience. But and this was being done all over the East Coast in the 80s. You had so many intellectuals that were light years ahead. They were
Mhm.
using their degrees as a gateway and as keys to try to solve community problems. They weren't using their degrees to say, I have a degree, you don't have a degree. They
Yes.
were
Yes.
used that knowledge base
Yes.
to create knowledge to address issues. That's why the 80s was a time period, you know what I'm saying, that it opened the way for Islam.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? It opened the way for Islam. And then but you know what happened in the 80s and the 90s. That's when we got hit with the drug culture
Right.
hardcore to
Yep.
undermine that process.
Yep.
But if we can tap into our experience, then we have to also, which is a more difficult part because some of us having reached this level of a sensation of urgency, and we haven't reached this level of consciousness, so to speak. We have to understand how Islamic principles are to be employed in our own development.
Mhm.
And that takes a higher level of interaction with Islamic knowledge to be able to utilize Islam to address our social issues.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? It was being done intuitively in the earlier generations, but there were
Yep.
some mistakes that were made. But now, in the name of literacy and the age that we're supposed to know more, we're not doing that intuitively.
Yep.
We're
Yep.
not applying Islam even intuitively. But we have to cross that bridge where we can take knowledge and utilize it for our own development. If we can't utilize it for our own development, and to address our issues, then we're not going to go anywhere. We're going to
And
stay
on,
in the same circle, and the younger generation is going to inherit the same problem. You know how we say the problem? Sorry, CL. The I want to say CL Smooth, but they're going to inherit. They're going to
Feel it,
inherit the
feel it.
same problem. Like for instance, when we say the problem of generational wealth, they're going to inherit the same problems of
Uh-huh.
family life, of community life. It's going to be the same cycle that repeats itself unless we're able to come together and have some solid discussions on how can we address this collectively.
But I was actually getting ready to say something, but I forgot what I was going to say. But back on the point that we've been talking about our experience with this whole situation with the gender dynamics changing, economics change. Like for us, it's not a new thing.
Right.
I know brothers who were in the prison system and their wives have PhDs and master's degrees. I know brothers who take care of their kids and who were in situations where they were taking care of the kids and the wife was actually going to work. Me and my own wife, you know, our situation, we both work. So we split the duties of the house, and it's not a big deal for most black men, and I would say most American men, period. It's not a big thing to okay, I'm going to go ahead and do the laundry. I'm going to go ahead and wash these dishes. Maybe this is a situation where she can't cook because she's coming back home late. I'm going to go ahead and cook. But many of our brothers and sisters who are coming from overseas and their children, they're still trying to navigate that whole entire situation. And what I hear from those brothers, what I'm hearing from them is like, no, I'm not. It's demeaning to me to do those things. She needs to be in the house to do those things.
And
And
for some of our people too, if their understanding of the religion is not principled,
mm,
you know what I'm saying? If they have only a certain conception of how family life can be, they're going to destroy their family with the religion. You understand? With
seen that
their
too.
understanding of religiosity.
Seen that
Yeah,
too.
that's why we said that the prophetic period in the early generation, they were dealing with fluidity. They were dealing with problematic situations. That's why you find Khadija was in a different economic situation than the Prophet. ﷺ. Sulaim, she converted some guy that was not a Muslim, and he became a Muslim. We have all these dynamics playing themselves out right now. So the
Mhm.
early generation has enough fluidity and is rooted enough in the Deen and Revelation to give us some tools to deal with all these dynamics. Even the Quran itself. I remember I wanted to do a paper on this. I was taking a class on Islamic political thought, and the issue came up to consultation. How do you navigate role disparity? When two people are making money, one person is not going to hear it's just my decision. They're going to say, I put in the house, I put in the pot too. I want decision. Through consultation, you can work through that a little bit. You understand what I'm saying? You can work through that decision making, the power struggle a little bit. But there has to be that we also have to have a greater understanding of the self. It has well, we're understanding the family unit. You know what I'm saying? We're working to keep the family unit alive. It's not just me as an individual. That's not easy to transcend individual interests. But
Yes.
as long as we're learning those skills and we're able to make it work. But if we're going to box ourselves in to how certain things should be and certain conceptions of manhood and womanhood and division of labor in the household just based on concepts of gender, we're not going to survive the struggle.
Well, here's the thing with that, Imam Yusuf Rios. The thing with gender rules is that in any society, if you are not in control of particularly your economics, right, you're not going to have any control over your gender roles. It's just not going to happen, right? In Western society, particularly within the Black community, we already know that Black community has been socially engineered, and it's like this type of experiment where it is the world's most predominant and first and only purely matriarchal society, right? Where the women rule everything, and it's meant to be like that. right? And when you're looking at the Prophet Muhammad sallam, he said when he's talking about the woman directly, he advised the woman to do what? To give charity because of their the way that they disrespect their husbands. Like they they're telling their husband, well, you never did anything good, so give charity, give sadaqah, these type of things, right? Black women have been trained to disrespect their men, right? And in the wider black society, love relationships, because we're talking about emotional intelligence, has been pushed as something, as a physical type of thing. You go based upon the way that a woman looks. The way that you sleep with the woman. This is what love was for many years in the wider black society. Now, and particularly in 2023, there's no such thing as love, and all relationships are based upon transactions. How much are you willing to give me? It's a pay to play. You understand? It's almost like a prostitution, right? And Muslims now, they are not unaffected by this because they are in the society. You understand? They are being affected by the culture, and we already know that black folks control the wider popular culture. If you want something done, just get black people to give it an okay, and you'll be able to market it,
There,
right?
there, there's a
Go
few
ahead.
things that I think if you all permit me to jump into this a little bit.
Go ahead.
I want to inject this that I think that when you study African cultures,
Mm,
there's a thesis like Dr. Oba Tashaka, he brings this up.
mm,
There's a thesis out there, especially in non Islamic African societies, and even in you can find it among some Muslims as well, that
mm,
Africa did have a matriarchal orientation,
mm.
but it wasn't dehumanizing
The
to the
men.
masculine or to the man,
Yeah.
right? So the carryover that is in the community
Mm,
in the Americas, we could probably make an argument that it is African culture, but it's not allowed to exist because of the capitalist dynamic. The
mm,
other issue is that relationships could be contractual, and it doesn't mean that they're just transactional,
mm,
right? A contractual agreement, you find some Muslims have been doing this for a while. Like, they're not necessarily getting married based on physical appearance
mm.
immediately or love or anything. They're like, okay, we agree to these things.
Yeah.
And then the idea of emotional bonding takes place. I think what happens is that the dehumanizing conditions, they call us to question, our relationships on multiple levels, even to the point where we're constantly questioning each other's intentions.
Mm.
But transactionalism is a consequence of capitalism.
Yeah.
Mm,
You know what I'm
mm.
saying? But we have to be careful not to dehumanize each other in the process, or turn this into a male female war, because at the end of the day, it's the grandmother, is the mother that's holding down a lot of these things, that's the protective, these relationships, that's the protective force. That doesn't
Mm,
mean the man is not out of the picture.
mm,
You know what I'm saying? But are we going, in an Islamic context, are we going to say that, okay, if you have are we going to have a problem with a strong woman? That's the question.
mm. Well, here the idea of strong women in the wider black society is not the Islamic concept. We're not talking about no Khadija bint Khuwaylid. We're not talking about Aisha bint. We're not talking. These are strong women, and in black society, strong woman means how loud and boisterous you can be, how obnoxious you can be, how much, how many um, funny catchphrases you can tell your man to put him in his
But I
place.
would piggyback on what brother Yusuf just said. isn't that just an outgrowth of capitalism? Because okay, we had our culture, and you brought up the culture of hip hop, which is a subculture of black culture. We
Yeah.
had hip hop come on, and then in the early '90s, when when ancestors start getting contracts with major labels, and
Mm,
the major labels started dictating to the acts how they were supposed to, what lyrics they were to have, how what images they were supposed to have.
Yep.
Now we
Yep.
have now we have Setsy Red, and now
mm.
we have these other female. We have this
Glorilla.
uh, all the Glorilla. We have basically the little Kimification. I just
Mm,
Yes.
coined a phrase for you.
mm,
Little Kimification of females in hip hop, where
mm,
we've and this is marketed. It's marketed to just like thug, the thug image, the gangster
mm,
image, the gang image is marketed to black males.
mm.
This that what you were just saying, the loud, obnoxious,
Yep.
hypersexual, sapphire,
Mm,
minstrel show image brought
mm.
into modern times through hip hop is being marketed to women as well. And we
Yep.
are just we have we are as a group we are being we're being taken advantage of by these images and by capitalists and these record companies. And we have black people who are willing to do that because people are willing to do anything for money at this
Hmm.
stage. Like you just said, like you said earlier, people are willing to do anything for money at this
Hmm.
stage. And even
Yep.
if it hurts the black community, even if it hurts other black people, I got to get the bag. So
Yep.
I will participate in creating this modern day minstrel show and marketing it to the people.
Hmm.
I,
Well,
I wanted to say something because I have to go in like a few seconds.
okay.
My battery is also about to die out. That the survival mind is going to allow us to say it's okay to deal with certain types of behaviors. When we move beyond survival,
Mm,
certain things are just not acceptable in the way that we
yes.
deal with each other. And so, as the more that we keep staying in that survival mind, whether it's reinforced by popular culture or actual conditions,
Mm,
many of us know that some of us we were not we didn't grow up in the hood, but we were in the suburbs, but we had the hood psychology because
hmm.
that's what we identified with. Because we
Hmm.
couldn't identify what was the reality in the suburbs because there was some social stratification. So in order to deal with our own identity struggles that were created by the society in many ways, we identified with our people surviving, and we didn't grow in those situations. That's where in the 80s, I think, in the 80s and the time period of the strong church, people may not want to hear that as Muslims, but they were in a better position to challenge that. But as long as we stay in the survival mindset, there's not going to be any emotions that are going to be present that are going to help us grow and flow.
Hmm.
A lot of our emotional displays are going to be still coming out of that survival experience. That's why you find, like you mentioned, the hip hop. You look like at a Cardi B. Cardi B was a pole dancer, and I'm pretty
Mm,
sure that if you go into her background experience, you're gonna find uh, molestation. You're gonna
hmm.
find maybe rape. You're gonna find a lot of issues. You're gonna find a lot of experiences that she went through, so that even being in the money realm, she's still she's banking off of that persona.
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying? She's making money off of it, but other people may not be having that same persona to make money. It just may be that they feel comfortable with that. That's where we have lost the power to define ourselves.
Mm.
Hmm. Right, and that goes back to what I was saying earlier. That if you do not control your economics, you're not going to control your family dynamics. All that Brother CL was saying, hip hop was an organic grassroots type of thing, and when it was organic and grassroots, we didn't have any of that nonsense that we had. Not and it wouldn't even be thought about. Right? It wasn't until other folks came in with their money and with their lucrative contracts and took it over like they do, right? That it became something else, right? So we as Muslims now, and not to sound cliche, but we do actually have the formula, right, for these issues and these ills, right? No self-respecting Muslim now is going to patronize things that are against the interest, not just against the Muslims, but the wider society at large, right? Because it's against our religion
Interest,
to do
yeah,
that.
and the deen, yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah.
And what has happened was that if you were a Muslim in the 90s, there was a move away from this type of grassroots type of dawah into a theoretical political type dawah that really didn't benefit anybody on the grassroots level, right? So now we have to go back to the grassroots, right? In my opinion, that's my humble opinion. I don't know if you if you've got a different opinion, but we got to go back to the grassroots and make sure our dawah is in fact grassroots.
For the sake of time,
Mhm.
unfortunately, I think we should come back because I think if we review our conversation,
Mm,
we're going to be able to systematize it better. But one thing I'll say from historical realities,
mm,
one thing that the Black Panther Party had right,
mm.
and this is what helped a lot of our imams, is that they identified what they wanted, which
Yes,
was a response. Their 10-point program was a response to their conditions.
yes,
So, in order to address their conditions, they made it very simple. Although
mm,
they were very intellectual, whatever it may be, they made it very simple so everybody can understand what's the common ground.
mm,
What is it that we need? So the sense of like our priorities, we have to have certain things. Like you mentioned, the issue of economics,
mm,
family dynamics came up.
mm.
The issue of I mentioned the issue of applying the deen to our lives. We have to have a sense of clear priorities
Mm.
that we're all focusing on that in order
Yes.
to start seeing social change. But right now, if we don't clarify the path, it's easy to say Quran and Sunnah, but what does that mean practically
What does that mean
as a
practically?
program?
Yes. Thank you.
What does it
Thank
mean
you.
practically as a
Yeah.
program? What is it that we're addressing with Quran and Sunnah?
Mm,
And what is our program on a basic level? As
mm.
long as that's not clear, we're not going to be able to address many issues. But family has to be the priority.
100%.
Definitely. That's a great point about programming versus slogans. I
Mm.
think a lot of times we've gotten into sloganism. Uh, you know, Quran and Sunnah,
Yeah.
Salafi Dawa,
Mm.
uh, all these different
Just
slogans.
some nice sounding words that
Yeah,
have no practical application except for sounding nice, right? And so when you start applying, that's a different thing, right? And as Imam Yusuf said, you have to be very specific and have like a type of program in order to implement for the change of the wider society. But if everybody's just kind of doing their own thing and just kind of yelling out the good talking points because it kind of shows what group they're in, right? Then how does that help the people at large? It doesn't. I'm sorry to say it doesn't. You know, like that's why I like what Imam Akil Ingram, what he's doing. What is he? He's doing work in his city. He's out there. He's out in the streets, not by himself, but he's going physically on the streets, feeding the poor. You know what I mean? He's
mm.
working with the mayors there and the political, and he's
And
actually
I
got a
love
program.
seeing him doing the convocation that he
Yeah,
does every year. He does the convocation with the city council.
city council.
To
Yep.
have a Muslim, imam do something like that,
Mm,
I think that's a great thing.
yeah.
But there's a time period a few years ago that if you said, especially a brother like that is upon the dawah,
Mm.
I'm going to do a convocation, you were deviant.
You're deviant. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
You're deviant, right? So I
That's
know.
why we said that without having an understanding of
I think we lost brother Imam.
He's
Yeah,
about to make a point too. He's about to drop
yeah,
the
and he's
jewels.
about to make a point, man. But yeah, yeah. So let's close it out for the Imam there, brother Sial. Keep going, keep going.
No. Yeah, like I was going to say, something, him making some of the moves that he's making with the convocation, which is a great thing. Um, you know, or someone speaking at a rally that's
Yeah.
amidst, it's not an all is Muslim crowd, it's a mixed crowd, but speaking on
Mm.
the issue of justice and
Yeah.
quoting what the Quran says
Imam
about justice.
Tahir Wyatt.
Tahir Wyatt, yes. And he got flack for doing that. He
Yeah.
got flack, and some of our brothers just have, I said this on my community page, this really oversimplistic black and white way of thinking
Mm.
does not solve anything. It doesn't
Exactly.
actually solve any solutions. And it
Mm.
causes, this ultra dogmatic stance for, you take you either are you get with this or you get with that. Are you with
Mm.
this or you with that?
Mm.
Yay or nay,
Yeah.
and it just
And
causes
now look,
splitting and
now
division.
3 decades later, look at where their kids are at, all in the graveyard shooting each other up and all
I
kinds
said that on my community page.
Mm.
While people were so caught up in sloganism, where
Mm.
people were so caught up in black and white thinking,
Mm.
they also had this attitude that the ills of society, and it's not just this. You say if we harken back to what we were saying a couple of minutes ago, black, Arab, DC, all the Muslims had a sense of an idea that the problems of society could not touch them because they were Muslim.
Yes. Yes.
That there was some invisible shield,
Shield
like
because
an invisible shield around
yes.
them that somehow what was going on, even while living in neighborhoods where there's economic, social, criminality, all types of issues going on in that neighborhood, somehow people thought that it wasn't going to touch them. It wasn't going to touch their wives. It wasn't going to touch their children. And we
Mm.
see it has touched their children.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. May Allah protect us all. I mean,
I mean,
this and I said it before on this channel that black people, they started practicing Islam like they practice Christianity.
mm.
You know what I mean? Just this pie in the sky type of religion.
Or like the NOI is spookism.
Spookism, yeah, and I'm sorry to say, but they got a point. They got a point, right? Of course, they take it way too far, right?
Yeah.
But we believe in Allah, we believe in the last day, we believe in Jannah. We're not like them; they don't even believe in Jannah, they don't believe in hellfire, right?
Yeah.
But the idea that that you just gotta wait until you die to get some sort of like this is not Islam. The Prophet ﷺ, he didn't wait. Even the Prophet ﷺ, he suffered. The Prophet ﷺ, when they were boycotted, he was right there in the boycott. He was there eating the leaves of trees, to survive along with the Sahaba. You know what I mean? When he could have been living like a king, and he refused. Right? The Prophet ﷺ had his teeth punched out. You know what I mean? So the Prophet ﷺ, he was in the mix too. If the Prophet ﷺ can have his teeth punched out, if actual Anbiya can be killed, right, then what makes you think that you're so special that all you got to do is show up and then Allah is going to protect you from every single thing for showing up? Right? That's some weird things that we used to believe in Christianity. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The what do they call it in Christianity? The prosperity gospel.
Yeah.
Just donate $10 and say this
And then
prayer.
don't worry, God is going to send you. He's going
you're
to
going to get
multiply
rich.
for you. Give me $1,000. Don't worry, the Lord is going to multiply for you 1,000-fold. Right?
Yeah. So, but I mean, it's the same mentality. Not saying that these things aren't important. It's just it wasn't all there was to it.
Yes. Exactly.
Yes, having the correct Aqidah is extremely important.
Yes.
But simply making sure you, the community, and your wife and your kids have the correct Aqidah, that's great. Now, but you still got to have money. You still got to have businesses. Yep. You still got to have property. You still got to organize. You got to still have to organize.
Yep. And you have to have relationships and brotherhood and all this kind of stuff, right? And if you're not controlling your economics within your community, you're not really controlling anything else, right? So, and controlling your economics comes with a hell of a lot of sacrifice,
Mm.
a hell of a lot of sacrifice. Sometimes you're gonna go hungry. Okay, sometimes you're not gonna have the lights paid. Because you're trying to control your own economics. You're not trying to basically promote a system that is against the interest of your own people. All right. So, anyways, brother, see last words before we sign off.
Yeah, I mean, this was a excellent conversation, mashallah.
Mm.
We should, get the brother back on. We gotta, like he was saying, we gotta pick back up on this.
Yeah,
Inshallah.
inshallah. I hope he comes back on. Yeah, it's amazing, man. Inshallah. But Jazakallah khair for all the guests. Jazakallah khair Imam Yusuf Rios. Jazakallah khair for Brother CL for popping in. And
Paranabits. Abu Shada said, that's an incredible book.
yeah, inshallah. Yeah, and he's trying to get me to purchase it too. I have to purchase it as well, right? He knows a brother that's selling out here in Canada, right? So, but hayakum Allah. May Allah reward you all. And tomorrow, Saturday, I'll see you guys tomorrow, inshallah. Subhanaka wa
Inshallah.
bihamdik. Shadu wa atubu ilaik. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.